So the Codes of the Agunot are a large series that I began when I discovered the number of Agunot today in Israel. And it's an alarming number. There's no reason why there should be this number of Agunot. And as a form of protest, I decided to do a series called the Codes of the Agunot. And I got permission from the Israel National Library to digitally reproduce their antique ketubah collection. So I did that, and then as a metaphor for the state of her marriage, I tore those ketubahs to pieces. I shredded them. And then I hand sewed every one of those little pieces, because every word of that ketubah is now trapping her in this horrible state that she can't get out of. The tragedy is that it's paper that's trapping her, and paper that she needs to free her from this state. So these coats are all made of paper. And I left all the threads hanging from the stitching that I did, because her whole life is hanging. She's hanging, waiting for the Rabbanut to change her status. She's trapped until they do. I think that I tend to go back to and utilize very often paper, fabrics, and thread, or garments, the concept of a garment, because I grew up with fabrics. My grandfather and my mother had a fabric store. So I grew up with these things. So they're kind of my first response. It's like an innate mechanism that I have for working, which is I first want to create something out of paper or fabric or thread and sew it. And I think there is kind of an analogy to mending and healing things with needle and thread. Starting, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I started to see women in burqas. And these were Jewish ultra-Orthodox women in black burqas, like as Saudi Arabian burqa as you can imagine, except that these women were holding the hands of little Haredi boys with tzitzit and payas. So you knew they were Jewish. Most Israelis call these the Taliban, which is a nickname, but they're actually a sect of ultra-Orthodox women called the Bruria Karen. I think that most ultra-Orthodox Jews consider this to be a little off the grid. However, I see more and more and more of these women in Mea Sharim, so it's not going away. So as a form of protest, I decided that I would take Albrecht Dürer's diptych of Adam and Eve that he did in 1507. And you would think that there would be much more discomfort with nakedness and the human form, 500 some years ago than there is today. But in fact, they were much more comfortable with the human body and nakedness. So I took that diptych and I did to Eve what these women are doing to themselves. I covered her completely from head to toe. And a very interesting graphic thing happened, which is that in the actual diptych, Eve's gaze is benign. But when she becomes completely covered and there's just one eye, that gaze becomes accusatory, as if she's looking and blaming someone. And the truth is that a lot of these women have taken this on themselves. Nobody's forcing them. However, I have started to see little girls dressed in burqas. That girl doesn't have enough agency to dress herself. Somebody is forcing her to dress that way. And that for me is really the biggest crime of all. So this was really a protest about what I see every week happening on the streets of Mea Sharim. I think that you could consider me kind of an activist artist. In other words, I use my art as a platform to either make people aware of a problem or to protest something that I see happening in the world today. And I guess there's two important things that the viewer needs to know about me, which is I chose as an adult to become Orthodox, and I chose as an adult to become Israeli. I wasn't born into either of those situations. And so when there are things wrong, deeply wrong with either of those systems, and often they're together, I take it personally. And I'm using my art really to protest this and to make people aware of it. The most comfortable language that I have is a visual language. It's not Hebrew, it's not English, it's art, it's visuals. Most of the time, I want to do something that's aesthetic, that is very visually pleasing, and draw the viewer in, and then I want to confront the viewer with an issue or a problem. First, you see something graphic or beautiful or huge or or something that you want to enter. So you proceed, and then you suddenly become aware of the details. And maybe you're confused, or maybe you suddenly, realize what you're seeing, and it shocks you into becoming aware of an issue or a problem. That for me is when my art has been the most successful.